There are moments online that stop your scroll and make you feel like you accidentally walked into someone else's private disaster through your phone screen. And that's exactly what happened the night Drew Jenkins went live and everything broke open. For months, his family's messy public life has been a slow, exhausting carousel. Motel rooms, pleas for help, snatches of domestic chaos that read like reality TV in micro-episodes. But this stream felt different. It wasn't Stephanie hollering from off-screen or an awkward staged clip meant to goose engagement. It was Drew, alone, outside, the wind audible. His voice not just tired, but cracking in a way that suggested something inside him had finally given up trying to be performative. People who have watched the Jenkins content for a while say they've seen both spectacle and sincerity. But that night, the facade slipped, and what remained raised a host of sharp, human questions. What happens when all the small choices made for content add up to real-life consequences? And who pays the price when a family is both public and precarious?
At first glance, the scene was disorienting because it turned our expectations inside out. Drew has long occupied the calmer role in their duo, the placid foil to Stephanie's theatricality. He's the one who often looks like the passenger, the person who nods and lets her speak the lines. So seeing him on a cold evening, voice wobbling as he explained that an attorney's email had set a court date for February that could change his life, felt surreal. He explained in fits and bursts that read as part explanation and part confession that Desiree, the mother of his son Deshaun, had moved toward legal action, that a trial date had been set, and that the possibility of losing custody was now very real. For viewers who have seen the Jenkins life play out as an ongoing saga, the moment was heavy not only because of the raw feeling, but because the stakes were obvious. Custody, stability, and a child's sense of home were suddenly up for public debate. And the father people had seen joking and drifting for years was suddenly undone by fear. It's worth being methodical about what Drew said and the ways people reacted, because so much of this mess is created by the blurring of performance and reality. He told viewers repeatedly, almost like he was trying to prove it to himself and anyone listening, that he had once been the one holding jobs, working long hours, sleeping little, and making sure Deshaun was taken care of. He described a cassette of very adult hardships, juggling 2 jobs, sleeping only a couple of hours a night, then losing stability when rent money allegedly went missing and an eviction followed. He named rehab struggles, acknowledged a relapse that he minimized but nevertheless said had occurred, and then circled back to the email that had arrived and the fear that had unspooled in his chest. You could hear him attempting to stitch a narrative that argued he had been a committed father, that he had been there in the earliest years, and that a looming court appearance felt like an unjust thunderbolt. The response among viewers was immediate and fierce. Those who've been watching the Jenkins story for months, the clips of kids in motel hallways, the sometimes indifferent parenting moments, the Amazon wish lists, and the GoFundMe pages, weren't interested in the performance. They wanted accountability. For many, the tears were not convincing. Why now, they asked, were the emotions pouring out only when a legal document arrived? Why had the family repeatedly prioritized optics over preparation? Why, in a live feed about being evicted and missing basic goods, would a toddler be left to wander near boxes in a rat-infested storage scene earlier posted by Stephanie? The internet can be brutal, and in this case, the cruelty was aimed at a man who had spent years appearing in frames where passivity felt like complicity. In short, the meltdown reoriented sympathy toward the kids and away from the performative adults who have turned strife into content. That's not to say the tears were manufactured. It's very possible, likely even, that Drew was, for a moment, truly terrified. Courts and custody hearings are not merely story beats. They are life-altering procedures decided behind closed doors and under oath. For any parent,
The idea of losing a child to a legal process is bone-deep terrifying. And yet context matters. The public record of the Jenkins online life shows a pattern: repeated crises, occasional pleas for donations, and a series of rationalizations that never seem to coalesce into a sustainable plan.
The eviction cycles, the claims about missing rent money, and the alleged reliance on government assistance have created a picture that judges and lawyers evaluate differently than an audience inside a gossip spiral. For a court, the question will be stability, safety, and who can provide reliable care. For Drew, the live moment was an attempt to make a case in public, to show tears and testify to his love, before he makes a case in a courthouse where the rules are less performative and more evidence-based. A large part of the audience's skepticism comes from perceived inconsistencies in his story. On Live, he said he had worked hardest for his child earlier in life, that he had been the one commuting and working multiple jobs while Deshaun was a baby. He also said the family had lost housing because rent money was gone, implying someone else had mishandled funds. If that's the case, courts will want documentation: pay stubs, bank statements, utility bills, eviction notices, and communication threads. The internet doesn't get to demand that paperwork, of course, but viewers are entitled to be suspicious when a pattern of last-minute packing and emergency fundraising repeats itself. Many in the comment sections who once sent gifts or supported GoFundMe campaigns now feel hoodwinked, believing that the help did not yield long-term stability for the children who mattered most. If you step back, this is a small, sharp piece of an enormous contemporary question about social media families. Where is the line between documenting hardship for community support and staging it for attention? We have examples across platforms where creators use real vulnerability to build audiences, and sometimes audiences respond with real help. That can be wonderful, but the ethics shift when generosity is met with disappearing accountability. If viewers give money to a family for essentials and those essentials later appear ruined in a storage unit because of pests or mismanagement, the relationship between creator and audience becomes uneasy. People feel used. That feeling is what colored responses to Drew's emotional live. Viewers had been buying into a long thread of crises, and now a legal crisis threatened to sever the father from the child. But not everyone was convinced the father's priority had ever been the child's welfare. Another layer of this story is the way by which Drew and Stephanie have curated narrative roles. Stephanie has been loud, theatrical, and the clear content engine. Drew, by contrast, often appears as the quieter partner who nods and watches. In a lot of their videos, he is complicit not only in her behavior, but also in the content strategy that has made them both visible. Silence can be an endorsement. Viewers have seen clips in which Drew does not object to questionable choices, whether that's a child left alone moment, unwise spending while housing was precarious, or publicizing private moments that might have been better kept off camera. By staying silent, by allowing certain lines of content to pass, one becomes part of the machine. Drew's tearful admission now that none of it is okay and that he might lose custody exposed that quiet complicity in a painful way. People asked, rightly, why he had not stepped away earlier, why he had not protected the child when things started to fall apart. The questions landed like hard stones. We should also look closely at the role Desiree plays in this narrative. The mother of Deshaun, the woman who reportedly filed the custody petition, has been painted in different lights across social feeds. Sometimes a rational parent trying to get her child into a stable environment. Other times a vindictive ex initiating legal pressure. The truth is seldom so simple. Courts will evaluate the child's best interests, looking at the child's relationship with each parent, the living conditions offered, and the presence of routines and supports. If Desiree has evidence of a more stable environment, or of incidents that suggest the child would be safer elsewhere, that will carry weight. Conversely, if Drew can produce solid plans for housing, steady income, and robust caregiving, those facts will matter to a judge. The point is not to vilify Desiree, who also has a right to have her child's safety prioritized, but to point out how messy custody fights are.
They are, in the best scenarios, about logistics, not spectacle. In the worst, they become battlegrounds for moralizing internet audiences. One of the more heartbreaking bits of the live was how Drew repeated that Deshaun had told him multiple times he wanted to stay with his dad. For a 9-year-old, a preference is meaningful but not determinative. Courts consider a child's wishes as one factor among many, but they also consider age, maturity, and whether the child is being coached. In a family that has repeatedly broadcast its inner life, objectivity gets tricky. A child who spends a lot of time on camera may feel pressure to say things that match a narrative seen on posts. Judges are alert to this. They know public performance can shape testimony. In the end, what a child says to a parent in a motel hallway is a tender data point, but it doesn't outweigh documented stability or evidence of a safe environment. That is the sobering reality that likely undergirds why Drew's tears felt so raw in the face of a legal system that doesn't care about likes or engagement. It cares about proof. The night also exposed a raw truth about how quickly a life can pivot when the safety net is thin. Drew admitted to being homeless, to quitting a Home Depot job, to a relapse, to frantic attempts to find housing through Redfin listings and the like. He wasn't offering a clear plan or the kind of comprehensive evidence courts favor. Instead, he offered emotion, a plea, and a sense of being stranded by poor choices and the consequences that followed. What's tragic here is not merely that a parent might lose custody. It's that the children have spent their formative years in a precarious setting that could have been prevented with different choices earlier. That's a hard assessment to make because people make mistakes and need redemption. But courts are less interested in redemption narratives than in present-day capacities. If a father wants to preserve custody, he needs more than apologies. He needs documentation, a stable living situation, and a willingness to prioritize the child's needs above showmanship. Another facet worth decompressing is the relationship between Drew and Stephanie. Outside observers often describe it as a fraught collaboration, in which Stephanie's charisma drives content and Drew's acquiescence fuels the continuity of the narrative. The two of them have crafted a brand that centers on struggle and resilience. Yet the lived reality, as glimpsed through the storage unit and other content, seems to have criminally low levels of practical preparation. People watching have labeled this behavior neglectful because it appears the pair repeatedly reacted to emergencies rather than proactively preventing them. That pattern is not a single moral failing. It's often a compounding set of choices. A preference for immediate relief over long-term planning, an addiction to audience validation that displaces the slow, boring work of building stability, a deeper inability to save or manage money. Whatever the causes, they accumulate, and the child is usually the one who absorbs the consequences. What complicates the moral calculus is the public's role. The audience has given them thousands of goods and some amount of money over the years. That support often comes with a moral contract. Viewers donate, believing their help will be used to secure essentials. When the result is eviction and ruined storage units, donors feel betrayed. The anger is understandable. In that sense, the live meltdown functions as a kind of litmus test. Is Drew genuinely remorseful and committed to change, or is he trying to spin the narrative one more time to tap into sympathy and resources? That question matters because it shapes subsequent interactions. If they pivot to sustained, verifiable improvements, documented housing, stable work, therapy, and clear parenting plans, some supporters may return to help. If the cycle repeats, public generosity turns into good intentions that never lead to long-term outcomes. It's also important not to flatten Drew into a caricature. Addiction, financial instability, and complex family dynamics are real human problems that require compassion and structural support. People in crisis need both accountability and help. A purely punitive reaction from the internet achieves little for the child or the struggling adults. But a steady, careful approach that pushes for concrete outcomes rather than performative moments could be a pathway forward. Offer resources that ensure the kids' safety. Encourage local social services to intervene when necessary. And allow the legal system to adjudicate custody without the noise of likes and comments. In practice, that is a tall order. The culture of broadcasting personal life complicates any attempt to seek quiet, effective help. Drew's live was both a confession and a plea, a man suddenly desperate enough to go public with shame. And it illuminated the core fissure in the Jenkins narrative, the tension between image and responsibility. There is a human urge to believe in redemptive arcs. The father who has been flawed can suddenly become resolute and change. The problem is that transformation requires more than a few tear-streaked minutes. It requires steady discipline, a plan, and proof. It requires showing up off-camera for months and years in ways that make the child's life better. That kind of steadiness seldom creates viral content. It rarely produces the dramatic moments that build followers, but it is what keeps custody. As the community watches the story move toward a February courtroom, the stakes become stark and immediate. A judge will weigh the father's testimony and demeanor, but also the dry paperwork, rental histories, employment records, school attendance for the child, medical care, and testimony from social workers and teachers if applicable. These are the items that determine outcomes, not the viral timestamps on a TikTok reel. That reality is part of what renders the Jenkins saga tragic. Months and years of being filmed and narrated have created a public mythology that neither protects nor replaces the evidence courts ask for. The film of their life is not court-ready. At root, the tightness of public scrutiny now reflects a cultural contradiction. We want to support creators. We want to see vulnerability. But we also demand that vulnerability be converted into responsibility. When it doesn't, outrage follows. That is what makes the reaction to Drew's live both predictable and morally complicated. You can feel pity for a man who says he's terrified about losing his child, while also feeling anger that he and his partner didn't take steps earlier to prevent this outcome. You can insist on compassion while also demanding accountability. The two things are not mutually exclusive, and framing them as opposites tends only to produce polarized outrage. There will always be a darker, voyeuristic side to these stories. Commentators who thrill in the collapse, pundits who make moral theater out of grief, and audiences who enjoy being outraged. But there is also a quieter, more useful option. Leverage attention into effective, real-world help. If there are local resources that could stabilize the children's environment, redirect focus to those. If legal representation is needed, prioritize properly vetted help. If psychological support could help the adults address addiction or trauma, push for it with the same fervor people use to type hot takes. It's possible to care and to be critical, to feel anger at mismanagement while still advocating for children's well-being. Watching Drew cry on live is, for now, only one chapter. It's a chapter that confirmed some fears. A family in repeated crisis, a pattern of instability, and a father suddenly confronting the legal consequences of choices made on camera. The coming months will be decisive. They will tell if this meltdown marks the beginning of a real attempt to change course or simply another public performance with real-world fallout. Either way, the most important voices will not be those who craft snappy captions about resilience or those who pump out dispassionate hot takes. The most important voice is the child's, the one who needs continuity and safety. The rest of us, viewers, critics, and casual observers, can choose to be helpful witnesses or just another crowd watching the fall. What we become matters as much as the verdict that will come in February. By the time the court date arrives in February, the internet will have said plenty. But what truly matters is what happens behind closed doors. Whether the adults in this story choose restraint over spectacle, follow-through over flash, and the children's steady safety over content-driven chaos. If Drew and Stephanie can turn public pressure into private responsibility, stable housing, consistent work, proven caregiving, and real accountability, then this could be the painful pivot that finally protects the kids. If not, the cameras will have documented one more cautionary tale about what happens when online fame outpaces basic parental duty. Whatever else you feel watching this unfold, let that feeling push you towards something useful. Demand verification where charity is asked for. Donate to vetted local services rather than fueling performative crises. And keep the focus where it belongs, on the little humans who deserve safety, not views. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments section below and subscribe for more drama and the latest updates. See you soon!